Pills won't be fast enough, my daughter-in-law's voice hissed from behind the oak door. And the story I overheard was a terrifying plan. I'm Carolyn Reed, a 72-year-old retired teacher from the small town of Maple Creek, Ohio, and this is the story of how I uncovered the true faces of the very children I sacrificed my life to raise. If you're a mother, listen to my story and never think you truly know the ones you love most. My name is Carolyn Reed. 10 years ago, at 62, I thought I had it all. A peaceful life in Maple Creek, Ohio, 2 sons who I believed were successful, and a legacy, not of money, but of a good name built by my late husband, a firefighter. In a small town, a good name is the only thing that truly matters. I didn't know that. Right under my own roof, vultures were circling, not just for me, but for my dearest friends as well. The story of my downfall began on a sunny October afternoon, the kind of honey gold late autumn Ohio sun that makes you believe in good things. I had just pulled an apple pie from the oven, its crust a perfect golden brown, the scent of cinnamon and baked apples filling the kitchen where I'd spent over 30 years raising my 2 boys. This pie was for Michael, my eldest, the golden boy of the Reed family. 45 years old, a successful financial advisor with his own office downtown, Michael was my pride and joy, a testament to all my sacrifices. I decided to give him a little surprise, a sweet slice of his childhood in the middle of a busy workday. Around 5 in the afternoon, I drove to his Reed Financial Services office. I knew most of his staff would be gone for the day, which made it the perfect time to drop by without being a bother. I walked into the building holding the still warm pie, carefully wrapped in an embroidered dish towel. Just as I'd expected, the reception area was empty. The secretary had already left. A warm light spilled from down the hall, and I saw the door to Michael's corner office was just slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light stretching across the floor. I smiled, about to walk over a knock, when I suddenly heard Brenda, his wife. Her voice was sharp and impatient, nothing like the sweet tone she usually used. "We can't wait any longer, Michael. The audit is only 3 weeks away. If they find that hole, your career, our reputation, it's all over." I froze. This sounded like a private argument or a serious work problem. I didn't want to intrude. With a mother's sense of decency, I decided to step back and sit on the guest sofa in the reception area, figuring I'd just wait until their conversation was over. My spot was a bit hidden, and in the silence of the empty building, their voices carried down the hall with a terrifying clarity. "I know," Michael's voice answered, and I could hear the strain in it. "I know, Brenda. I'm handling it." "Handling it how?" Brenda shot back. "The only way to get that kind of money that fast is from her. What's our plan? You said you had a plan." My heart started to beat in a funny way. Were they talking about me? About my money? My initial curiosity quickly soured into a deep sense of unease. And then Michael spoke, the voice of my son, the child I had poured all my love into raising, now cold and clinical, as if he were outlining a business strategy. "I know. Everything's in place. The placebo pills are already in her medicine cabinet. Scott swapped them out this morning when he came by to fix the faucet. It looks exactly like her real lisinopril bottle." The pie on my lap suddenly felt like a lead weight. The air in my lungs turned to ice. Scott, my youngest son, he was in on this too? No, this had to be a nightmare. I was hearing things. But Brenda's voice continued, ruthless and practical. "What about the shock? You have to create a shock big enough to make her blood pressure spike. Just the fake pills won't be fast enough." And then Michael said the final words, the ones that killed my soul. "I've thought of that. This weekend, I'm going to tell Mom that we have to put Buddy down. The vet said he doesn't have much longer anyway. That news will be enough to break her." Buddy, my old golden-haired terrier, my faithful companion, the perfect murder weapon. A soft clatter broke the silence. The pie plate had slipped from my hands. By some reflex, I managed to catch it just before it hit the marble floor. But the sound, as small as it was enough to stop the conversation in the office. "What was that?" Brenda's voice called out, sharp with alarm. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. My entire body turned to stone. I heard a chair scrape back, the sound of footsteps heading for the door. This was it. They were going to see me. And dear God, what would they do to me? But then Michael's voice, sounding reassuring, said, "It's probably just the cleaning crew upstairs. It's late. Come on, let's go home. We can talk more there." The footsteps receded. A few seconds later, I heard the office door click shut, then the jingle of keys. I sat there, motionless, clutching the pie to my chest. Its warmth spread through my clothes, but my body was ice cold. I heard their footsteps head out the back employee entrance. They hadn't come through the reception area. They hadn't seen me. I don't know how long I sat there as the shadows in the room grew longer. When I finally stood up, my legs were trembling so badly I could barely stand. I looked down at the pie in my hands. A long crack ran through the crust from the near fall, just like my life. I stumbled out of the building. The cold October evening air hit my face, but I felt nothing. I didn't drive home. I walked to the nearby park where my husband and I used to take Michael and Scott for walks when they were little boys. I sat down on a cold, hard bench. The apple pie, a symbol of a mother's love, was now the evidence of the most sickening betrayal. I unwrapped the towel. The sweet smell of apples and cinnamon rose up, but to me, it smelled of death. I didn't cry. My tears seemed to have dried up the moment I heard Buddy's name. With a slow, deliberate motion, I tilted the pie plate and emptied the entire thing into the trash can beside me. It was a funeral for the son I thought I knew, a funeral for my blind love, a funeral for the gentle, trusting mother that was Carolyn Reed. When I stood up to leave that park, a different woman was walking in my shoes, a colder, harder woman, someone who would not break, someone who would fight. For several nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the cold, calculating voices of Michael and Brenda. The image of old Buddy looking at me with his trusting eyes made my chest ache. The house felt cold, and the family photos on the walls seemed to mock me. I had to do something, but I didn't know where to start. I felt so alone and helpless. I needed a little warmth, a bit of normalcy. I decided to visit Esther Gable. Esther, 75, was my best friend. We were in the same book club, went to the same church, and were both widows. Her husband, a respected lawyer, had passed away 3 years ago. Since then, Michael had volunteered to help her manage her finances. "Michael is such a good boy, Carolyn," she would often tell me. "He's just like his father, always looking out for others." Those words now echoed in my ears like a curse. I went to Esther's house with a small basket of muffins, trying my best to put on a calm face. Her home always smelled of lavender and the old paper of her books. It had always been a safe haven. But today, something was off. When Esther answered the door, her smile seemed weak. "Carolyn, so good to see you. Come in, dear," she said. But her eyes seemed distant, unfocused. We sat in her living room, but our conversation was choppy. Esther would ask me about the book club, then ask the same exact question a few minutes later. She seemed unusually confused and tired. My heart began to pound. Just then, there was a knock at the back door. "Oh, that must be Scott," Esther said. "The dear boy is stopping by to fix the loose handrail on my stairs. Your sons are just angels, you know." Scott walked in, toolbox in hand. He flinched when he saw me, and the smile on his face became a tight, forced thing. "Hi, Mom. You're here too." "I came to visit Esther," I replied, my voice dry as dust. I tried to look him straight in the eye, but he immediately looked away, his shoulders slumped like a guilty man's. He busied himself at the staircase, trying to be quiet. His presence in this house, right now, was no coincidence. A chill ran down my spine. While Esther was in the kitchen making tea, my eyes scanned the room. On the little table next to her armchair was a weekly pill organizer, the kind with little compartments for morning, noon, and night. I knew Esther had high blood pressure and had to take her medication regularly. On an impulse I couldn't explain, I walked over to the table, pretending to admire a photograph. My hand trembling, I opened the Thursday morning compartment. Inside were 2 pills, a yellow capsule and a small white tablet. The white one looked familiar, like the blood pressure pills I'd seen before. But something wasn't right. Its surface seemed a bit dull, the edges not as sharp as they should be. My heart hammering in my chest, I heard Esther's footsteps returning. Quick as a flash, I used my fingertip to scoop out the white pill, my palm slick with sweat, and clenched it in my fist while my other hand picked up a magazine. By the time Esther came in with the tea tray, I was back on the sofa, trying to breathe normally. Scott finished his work quickly and left, barely saying another word to me. I didn't stay long either. I couldn't. Sitting in Esther's cozy home, looking at her tired face, knowing she might be another victim, it was more than I could bear. On the drive home, the tiny pill felt like a burning coal in my palm. I started to connect the dots. Michael was managing Esther's finances. Scott was constantly stopping by to help with odd jobs. Esther was becoming inexplicably frail. This wasn't just a plot against me. This was a pattern, a predatory network. My sons weren't just would-be matricides. They were vultures, preying on the elderly, the lonely, and the most vulnerable people in our town. When I got home, I went straight to the kitchen and placed the pill on a white saucer. It sat there, tiny and harmless looking, yet it held a horrifying truth. The truth that my fight wasn't just to save myself. It was to save my friends, to expose a systematic crime happening quietly in a place everyone thought was safe. The boundless love I had for my sons was dead. The pain and fear were still there, but now they were being compressed, forged into something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp as steel. I knew what I had to do. The gentle mother, Carolyn Reed, was a thing of the past. From that night on, I became a warrior. My war didn't begin with a bang, but with a calculated silence. It started in my own kitchen the next morning. I put a kettle on the stove, then deliberately went out into the garden to pull a few weeds. I waited until the kettle's whistle became a piercing, haunting shriek. I waited a little longer, long enough for steam to start billowing. Then I walked slowly back into the house with a bewildered look on my face, as if the sound were completely foreign to me. Brenda, my daughter-in-law, was already there. She'd started dropping by unannounced, a suspicious new habit. "Mom, for God's sake, are you trying to burn the house down?" She lunged for the stove, her face a mask of anger poorly disguised as concern. "You can't keep doing this. You forgot the water was boiling?" I looked at her, blinking my eyes blankly. "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. I just stepped out into the garden for a minute. I must be getting so forgetful." It was my first performance, and apparently a convincing one. I saw a flash of satisfaction in Brenda's eyes before she hid it behind her fake worry. From that day on, I became a frail, pathetic version of myself. I accidentally called Michael's youngest son by Scott's name. I left my wallet at the grocery store. During phone calls, I would pause mid-sentence and ask the person on the other end what we had been talking about. The climax of my act was an appointment with our family doctor, an appointment Michael insisted on arranging. Sitting in that cold examination room with Michael beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder in a show of comfort, I felt like a lamb being led to the slaughter. "How have you been feeling lately, Carolyn?" Dr. Miller asked, his eyes kind behind his glasses. I don't know, doctor," I said, my voice trembling. "Sometimes I feel so confused. I'll walk into a room and forget what I went in there for. The other day, I nearly set the kitchen on fire." Michael chimed in, his voice dripping with filial piety. "I'm very worried about her, doctor. She lives alone. She's been having dizzy spells and seems very forgetful. I'm just afraid she's going to fall or something worse will happen." Dr. Miller nodded gravely, scribbling notes in my file. "At your age, these can be early signs of cognitive decline. We'll run some tests, but for now, the family needs to keep a closer eye on you." As we left the clinic, Michael squeezed my shoulder. "Don't you worry, Mom. Everything's going to be okay. We'll take care of you." I nodded weakly, but inside, a wave of disgust washed over me. He was taking care of his plan, not me. My performance had been a success. They completely believed I was falling apart, that I was easy prey. They were starting to let their guard down. Brenda's cruelty became more and more apparent. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, walked by and said hello. Brenda came out of the house and draped a shawl over my shoulders. "You have to be careful not to catch a chill, Mom," she said in a babying tone, then turned to Mrs. Henderson, lowering her voice just enough for me to hear. "You know, her memory has been getting so bad lately. The poor dear." She was publicly planting the seeds, creating the image of a senile old woman, paving the way for any future accident that might happen. I just smiled sweetly, but under the shawl, my hand was clenched into a fist. Immediately after the doctor's appointment, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I called Arthur Davies. Arthur wasn't just my husband's lawyer, he was his best friend, the man he'd gone fishing with every weekend for 20 years. If there was one person in this world I could trust, it was Arthur. "Arthur, it's Carolyn," I said into the phone, my voice calm and clear, a complete departure from the trembling woman in the clinic. "I need to see you, urgently, and please don't tell anyone about this meeting, not even Michael." The silence on the other end of the line told me he understood the gravity of the situation. "My office, 1 hour, Carolyn. I'll tell my secretary you're coming by to sign some insurance papers." Arthur's office was a sanctuary, with floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves and the smell of old leather. It was a world away from the deceit and conspiracy I was living in. I sat across from him at his massive desk, took Esther's pill out of my purse and placed it on the polished wood. "What is this?" Arthur asked. "I think it's a placebo," I replied. And then I told him everything. About the conversation in the car, about the plan to use Buddy to kill me, about Esther's condition, about Scott's suspicious visits. I told him methodically, without a single tear, my voice as cold as a police report. Arthur listened, his expression shifting from surprise to horror and finally to a quiet rage. His large hands balled into fists on the desktop. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the tiny pill. "I can't believe it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "John, your husband, he would never. Michael and Scott?" "They aren't the boys John and I raised anymore, Arthur. They're someone else." Arthur stood up and paced the room. "You can't confront them directly. They'll deny everything, and they'll use this senility act against you. We need proof, undeniable proof." He stopped and turned to face me. "I know a man, Frank Miller, ex-homicide detective, now a private investigator. He's tough, discreet, and the best in the business. We're going to hire him." A week later, Frank Miller showed up at my door. He was nothing like the detectives I'd seen in the movies. He was close to 60, with a stocky build, short salt and pepper hair, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was wearing work clothes and carrying a toolbox. Arthur had introduced him to my sons as George, a retired handyman and gardener Arthur had recommended to help Carolyn out as she gets more frail. Michael and Scott had eagerly agreed. They thought he was just one more person they could control, another pair of eyes to watch me. They had no idea they had just personally invited a wolf into the vulture's nest. Frank, or George, blended into my life seamlessly. He came every day, mowing the lawn, trimming the hedges, fixing little things around the house. He was a man of few words, just nodding and offering a quiet smile whenever my sons or I spoke to him. But I knew his blue eyes missed nothing. On his second day, when Brenda and Kim came to visit, Frank was fixing the fence in the backyard. He could hear their entire conversation through a tiny microphone hidden in a potted plant on the porch. That night, he played the recording for me. "I am so sick of hearing Mr. Larson's war stories," Kim's voice whined. "Why can't he just kick the bucket already?" Paul Larson. I knew him, a veteran who lived alone in a house by the lake, an old friend of my husband's. Michael was his financial advisor, too. My heart sank. Brenda's voice replied, cold as ice. "Patience, Kim. His lakefront property is worth $1 million. Think of the commission Michael promised Scott. You'll get your trip to Hawaii, and you won't have to worry about all those stupid bills." Frank stopped the recording. "This wasn't a one-time plan, Mrs. Reed," he said, his voice low and steady. "This is a business. Your sons are running an elder exploitation enterprise." Over the next few days, the horrifying picture came into full view. Frank had installed listening devices and micro cameras in strategic locations in my home. He collected phone calls, conversations, undeniable proof. A systematic pattern of predation emerged. Michael, with his trustworthy facade as a financial advisor, would target wealthy, lonely, elderly clients. He'd gain their trust, becoming their financial manager and gaining power of attorney. Spot, the contractor, would get access to their homes under the guise of repairs and swap their medications. Brenda and Kim were the scouts, visiting to monitor the victim's decline and report back. I was living in a nightmare. Every day I had to play the part of a doting, senile mother, smiling at the children who were trying to murder me and my friends. Every night, Frank and I would sit in the dark, piecing together the fragments of their crimes. I didn't cry anymore. My grief had frozen into a solid block of ice in my chest. I thought I already knew the darkest truth. I was wrong. Frank, with the help of a tech expert, had managed to access the computer system at Michael's office. One night, he came to my house later than usual, his face set like granite. He placed his laptop on the kitchen table in front of me. "You need to see this, Carolyn." On the screen were emails, bank transfers, legal documents. Frank showed me how Michael had set up a shell corporation in Delaware. Every month, large sums of money were being siphoned from Esther's accounts, from Paul's, and from my own, all flowing into this fake company. But that wasn't the worst of it. "His plan isn't just to take their assets," Frank said, his voice dropping low. "This is his exit strategy." He opened another file. It was a copy of 2 one-way plane tickets to San Jose, Costa Rica, booked under the names Michael Reed and Brenda Reed. The flight was scheduled to depart in 3 months. Along with it was a lease agreement for a beachfront villa. Costa Rica doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States for financial crimes, Frank explained. The plan is simple. After you and the other victims have passed away, they liquidate all the assets, funnel the money to the shell company, and disappear. Scott and Kim aren't going with them. They were only going to get a small cash payout and be left here to face the music if anyone ever started investigating. I stared at the screen. It was a betrayal on top of a betrayal. Michael hadn't just betrayed his mother and his family's friends. He was ready to betray his own brother, leaving him to take the fall. It was a perfect, diabolical plan. That night, I stood by my bedroom window for a long time, looking out at the quiet garden that Frank had so carefully tended. I looked at my home, a place full of memories, a place I had once thought was the safest on earth. But now I knew it was just a stage, and the tragedy was nearing its finale. Any last bit of hesitation I had was gone. They had given me no way out for Esther, no way out for Paul, and so I would give them no escape. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy them with the very things they craved most: money, reputation, and freedom. The hunt was over. It was time to spring the trap. The trap was set, and all I needed was the right bait to lure the vultures in. The bait, ironically, was the very thing they craved most, my legacy. On a Tuesday morning, after meticulously planning every detail with Arthur and Frank, I picked up the phone and called Michael. I made my voice sound weak and tired, the voice of someone ready to surrender to her fate. "Michael, honey, it's Mom," I began, pausing for a moment as if gathering my thoughts. I've been doing a lot of thinking. Dr. Miller is right. I can't keep taking care of myself forever. I want to simplify my life." I heard a sharp, excited intake of breath on the other end, though he tried to hide it. "Are you serious, Mom? I'm so glad you see that. We only want what's best for you." "I know you do, son," I replied, and the word son felt like a curse on my tongue. "I want to call a family meeting at Mr. Davies' office so I can sign the final trust and will documents. I want to make everything clear so you kids don't have to worry a thing." "Of course, Mom, that's a wonderful idea. When were you thinking?" His voice was buzzing with an excitement he couldn't contain. "This Friday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Please let Scott and the girls know. I want all of my children there." When I hung up, I looked at Frank, who was sitting across the kitchen table from me. He just nodded, his blue eyes unreadable. "They'll be there," he said. "Predators never pass up an easy meal." The next few days passed in a tense quiet. I continued my role as the forgetful mother, and my children treated me with a sickeningly sweet affection. Brenda brought me a bouquet of flowers. Kim baked me a batch of cookies. They thought their victory was at hand. They had no idea they were walking the last few steps on the path to their own destruction. Friday morning, the Ohio sky was a heavy, slate gray that matched my mood. I wore a dark blue wool dress, a color of dignity and power, not the pale beiges Brenda usually picked out for me. When I walked into the conference room at Arthur Davis's law office, they were all there. Michael and Brenda sat on one side, dressed in expensive clothes, their faces confident. Scott and Kim sat on the other, looking more anxious, like second-tier accomplices unsure of their cut. They stood to greet me, their "good morning, moms" ringing false in the air. I just nodded, said nothing, and took the seat at the head of the table, next to Arthur. Frank, in his role as the loyal helper, stood in the corner of the room, hands clasped behind his back, as silent as a ghost. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his tone formal and cold. He opened a thick file. "Your mother, Mrs. Carolyn Reed, has made some important decisions regarding her estate. I will now read her new last will and testament and trust agreement." Michael and Brenda exchanged a small, triumphant smile. Scott swallowed hard. I could feel their greed in the air, thick and suffocating. Arthur began to read, running through the dry legal clauses. Then he got to the heart of it. "After careful consideration, I, Carolyn Reed, being of sound mind and body, do hereby decree the following. My entire estate, including the house at 14 Elm Street, Maple Creek, Ohio, all investments, bonds, stocks, and savings in all bank accounts shall be transferred in its entirety into an irrevocable trust." Arthur paused, looking up at them. Michael's brow furrowed in confusion. Arthur continued, his voice now sharp as steel. "This trust shall be named the Reed Gable Larson Elder Justice Foundation." A dead, heavy silence fell over the room. I watched the color drain from Brenda's face. Scott's mouth fell open. The what fund?" Michael stammered, his smug smile gone, replaced by utter disbelief. "A non-profit organization," Arthur explained coldly, "dedicated to providing free legal aid and funding independent investigations into the financial and physical abuse of senior citizens in the state of Ohio. The foundation will be managed by a board of directors, and its first chairwoman will be Mrs. Carolyn Reed." You're insane," Michael shouted, jumping to his feet and knocking his chair over. You can't do that. That's family money. You've lost your mind. Someone has influenced you. He glared at Arthur, then at Frank. Oh, but I can, son, I said, my voice ringing out in the room for the first time, calm and full of authority. And I can do this, too. That was the signal. The conference room door, which we had left slightly ajar, swung open. Frank Miller stepped forward, no longer the mild-mannered handyman, but an ex-detective radiating authority. Behind him were two plainclothes officers I knew to be county detectives. Brenda let out a small, terrified squeak. Kim began to tremble. What is this?" Scott asked, his voice cracking. Frank said nothing. He placed a small projector and a laptop on the table. A beam of light hit the white wall opposite them, and their nightmare began. The first image was a close-up photograph of the fake lisinopril bottle next to the real one, the different lot numbers clearly visible. "These are the pills you swapped in your mother's medicine cabinet, Scott," Frank's voice boomed, cold and precise, "and in Mrs. Esther Gable's pill organizer." Next came the lab report on Esther Gable's pill, 100% lactose and cornstarch. Then came the audio clip of Brenda and Kim's conversation, the one about Mr. Larson's $1 million house and the trip to Hawaii. Kim burst into hysterical sobs, burying her face in her hands. And finally, the finishing blow. Frank projected a complex diagram onto the wall. Arrows showed the flow of money from my retirement accounts, from Esther's, from Paul's, into a single entity, Ocean View Holdings, LLC, the shell corporation in Delaware. And right next to it, copies of 2 one-way tickets to Costa Rica, departing on December 15th, booked in the names of Michael and Brenda Reed. "You were going to leave me," Scott screamed, lunging at Michael. "You were going to take it all and leave me here to take the fall." The two brothers started throwing clumsy punches at each other, screaming curses. The two detectives quickly pulled them apart. The room descended into chaos. Brenda sat frozen in her chair, her eyes vacant. Kim just kept crying. As the detectives began to handcuff Michael and Scott, I stood up. I walked over to Michael, who was struggling against their hold, his face a twisted mask of rage and fear. I looked him straight in the eye, the same eyes I once saw my own reflection in. "Your father ran into burning buildings to save strangers," I said, my voice steady. "He taught you that a good name was the most valuable thing you could own. And you started invisible fires in the homes of people who trusted you, just to steal what they spent their lives building. You didn't just try to kill me, you killed the Reed name." I turned to Scott, my weak-willed younger son, who was trembling in the grip of the other detective. "I taught you how to use your hands to build things, to fix things. I was so proud of the homes you built, but you used those same hands to help tear down the most fragile lives, Scott. You helped your brother lay the foundation for my grave and the graves of my friends." I didn't say a word to my daughters-in-law. My gaze passed over them as if they were air. To me, they no longer existed. Their punishment would be a lifetime of shame and regret. As they were led away, out of Arthur's office, my world seemed to stop. The chaos subsided, leaving only a heavy silence and the cold, clean smell of justice. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a vast, empty space, a profound sadness for the children I had loved more than my own life. Afterward, Michael was sentenced to 25 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and elder abuse. Brenda, in exchange for a lighter sentence, testified against her husband and his family. She received 5 years probation and lost everything. Scott, for cooperating with the investigation, received a 10-year sentence. Kim divorced him and moved out of town with the children, starting a new life under a cloud of shame. Our foundation, funded by the very money they tried to steal, won the civil cases, recovering nearly all of the assets for Esther's and Paul's families. We've gone on to help dozens of other seniors across Ohio, exposing similar schemes, dragging predators into the light. Sometimes, late at night, I still look at the photograph of my two boys when they were young, with their innocent smiles and clear eyes. I wonder where the evil came from. Was it always there, hiding behind the smiles? Or was it born from the greed and selfishness of a world that always wants more? I don't have the answer. I lost the family I was born into, but I have built a new one, a family founded on truth, justice, and compassion. The vulture's legacy was one of destruction and unmarked graves. My legacy, our legacy, is one of protection, a shield for the vulnerable. And that is a legacy worth fighting for. My war is over, but my work has just begun.